I am Becky Wekenborg. I've worked for the Missouri Chamber for almost 19 years now, and prior to that I worked 12 years for Associated Industries, which is a similar not-for-profit. So all my career I've worked for not-for-profit organizations doing finances. Today we're going to talk about different things that affect you with not-for-profits, doing budgets, accounting procedure manuals, producing those and implementing those procedures in your organization. Oversight of all your financial statements is very important. There's so much fraud that's out in the world today, and oversight is very important to make sure all your ducks are in a row and when you go to audit and there's no possibility of fraud within your organization. I'm also going to go over some things with the not-for-profit tax returns, which is your 990, your 990T, and so forth. Some issues with employment tax returns and state returns that some of you, since you're new, that you may be interested in knowing, and things that you may have missed when you started, and things that you need to change with the state and Secretary of State and things like that, and then also audit preparation. So, ready? Here we go.
Audit preparation. How much fun is that?
Everyone has to do it. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about budgets. It's very important to have a budget. Usually you prepare your budgets every year on an annual basis. Getting ready for your budgets, it's something that you probably need to just meet with your boards and your main people in your organization and either plan out for a year, plan out for 3 years, plan out for 5 years, or even 10 years if you possibly can. And then based on those plans, implement your spending and what your income you perceive is going to come in based on that. If you're a new chamber, some of you, I don't know how long you've been in the chamber work with your local chamber, but something that most boards would like to see is to have in reserves at least 4 months of your operating budget. So if your operating budget is $120,000, they would like for you to build a budget so that you build up to $40,000 in your reserve, so that you can, in case there's some catastrophe or something happens, you lose some employees, your membership, something happens with your membership, you can at least survive for 4 months. Also, important with budgets, once you have those produced, you get it, of course, would be approved by your board or your executive committee. Make sure you constantly get with them and show them what your actual is and what your budget is approved and the variance between the two. It's very important to explain any variances. I do, I explain anything that's 5% up or above bottom. So if you're over budget 5%, why? What's the reason for it? Is it going to continue that way? Is it something that's just happened in the first 3 months of your fiscal year? You don't foresee anything else in the next 9 months of your fiscal year. So just make sure you're on top of that. Make sure you explain that. They're aware of it at all times. Again, the reserves, that's very important. You want to just build your organization back up and keep it as strong as possible. Next section is the accounting procedures manual. I did actually put a copy of mine in your binder. It is something that an auditor requests normally from you, so they can see your procedures, making sure everything is done in an accurate manner, looking for fraud that way as well. A big thing is segregation of duties in not-for-profit organizations. Here at the chamber, we have, before I even see what money has come in, 4 people have touched that check. Just to make sure there's a segregation of duties. Someone opens the mail, someone completes a tab of all the checks that came in. Then it goes to another person who puts it in our database. Then it goes to another person that submits it to our e-deposit, and then another person that goes to the e-deposit and deposits the check. So it's just making sure that there's no fraud possible in your processes. Same thing with accounts payable. You get the invoices. Purchase orders, we use those here at the chamber. I'm not sure if any of you use that, but that is very important that our purchase orders go with the invoices and the purposes behind that. And then our president, our CEO, or the department manager will approve those, and all that has to be on those statements prior to me processing any check. It's very important. And then I also, once I process the check, then I'm not even a signer on the check. That's another, eliminating fraud. Our bank only requires one signature, but we require two. We just don't want somebody to be able to take a check and sign it. The bank, it was going to cost us extra money for them to check to make sure there was two signatures. We decided, no, we're just going to do one, but our president CEO each month looks through our bank statement, and if there's a check that only has one signature, then that throws a red flag. But it has to have two signatures on those checks, and neither one of them is mine signature. Prepaid accounts, I've been told numerous times that's things that you can try to prevent fraud with prepaid expense accounts. Prepaid postage, prepaid maintenance. Actually, there was a case that this lady, I don't even know the dollar amount she got off with, but she was writing a check for postage, prepaid postage, $3,000 a month. She was actually writing a check to herself and depositing it, but if you don't check the postage machine, you just kind of each month pull it through, and they're like, okay, all of a sudden she left and postage was down $30,000 a year. Guess what happened? So prepaid postage, that says, if it's ACH, make sure it's approved by a second person, and then they check the bank statements for you. Oversight, again, that's another thing for fraud, preventing. What we do each month here at the chamber, and and our auditors recommend this, is having a second or third person, maybe two people. We have our CEO and CEO. They look at the bank statements. They look at my bank reconciliations that I produce. And then we get all the copies of the checks that come in each month that we dispersed out, and that everything has to match with that. Then they look through the general ledger system and all my general journals I make, and make sure that's all in compliance with the bank statements, and just continually complying to make sure that things are in order. Also, another thing, if you have employees, a thing that we've found in the past, when you have an employee and you do pay increases, make sure you document and have the employee sign off, this is my pay increase. Because I've had a position where someone said, no, that's not what you told me you're going to pay me. You were going to pay me X amount more. Make sure that's signed off, put in their personnel file, and to avoid any conflict there. Any questions so far in any of this information? It's pretty straightforward.
Who did you say that this agreement are given to, like as a standard in your organization? Who has a copy of this?
The accounting procedures.
Yeah.
I have a copy, the president and the CEO, and then also our auditors.
Great.
They keep that, and then they will, each year at the audit, they go through that and and they interview, we have names in there, and they interview our employees to make sure they are doing those processes.
Thank you.
Any other questions so far?
How often do you guys go over you were talking about the copies of the checks and the reconciliations and do all that stuff? Because we're only a 2-person staff chamber and then an 18-member board. And it's hard enough to get them all together for, the monthly meetings necessarily, to have somebody to sit down and spend time just going over that. Now our treasurer does on her own, and then we both are like the 2 signatures, so 3 of us technically are all looking at it.
As long as your treasurer is looking at that,
Okay.
and she's looking at the general ledger and all that information and all the back, then I think that as long as that's monthly, you might want your board. Our board chairman does not look at it. It's, he looks, we have 2 people that look at it, so that should suffice as our auditors.
Okay.
But I would think if your treasurer's looking at it, then that should be enough, So your treasurer's a signer as well?
She is, yeah.
Okay, so how many signatures do you require?
We do 2.
Do you do 2?
It's just, once again, she also has her own full-time job and things, so the 2 in the office, we sign the checks, and then she's constantly, it's QuickBooks Online with most of it, and she has access to all the bank accounts, so she can see any checks there, and she also actually does more of the reconciliation so that she's falling in line with what we're doing.
Okay.
So.
Well, actually, I do the accounting for CCM, your organization, and Tammy and I are the signers, and we're both of course, inside the organization. But what we do for that is we print out what needs to be paid and what account number it goes to. That is sent to the chairman of the board, and prior to any checks written, that's approved. So that might be another thing you could do. And so that you have that coverage if, something happens, hey, you proved that I could pay this out, so. And then that matches up to your check register and then also your general journal.
Okay.
So, any other questions? Then we'll go into tax returns for not-for-profits. And I don't know if you're all aware, but the federal law is that you have to, for a not-for-profit, you have to allow the general public to come in at any time to review your 990s or your 990Ts. So what I normally do, I keep a binder, say if they come in, I've never had anybody come off the street and ask for it though. And now you can go online and view them, so I don't know why they even have that law anymore anyway. But I have a binder each year I put together that has our 990s for all our entities under the chamber umbrella. And it's set at the front desk, so they don't even have to come in. I mean, they come to the front desk, they can just hand it to them and, be on their way. And if they need copies, then we can make copies, but like I said, I've never had anyone request that. But just, keep it so that the person that comes in is not coming back to your office and you're having to dig through everything. Just keep it all in one file at the front desk and it's easy access, is what I would recommend. The 990 is your main tax return, and that is usually filed if you have $200,000 or more in income per year. If you do not have more than $200,000, from $50,000 to $200,000, you can file the 990 EZ form. It's a much simpler form. It's only like 6 pages long, so if you have that, but you also have to have $500,000 or less in assets as well, if to file the EZ form. If you only have $50,000 or less in income per year, which I don't think any of you probably have that, you would file the 990N tax return. And what that is just a e-file. You go online saying, yes, I'm still in business, but I have less than $50,000 in income this year. And it's, you have to file that each year just to keep your name on register with the IRS. So also, I'm not sure if you're aware of the EFTPS program with the federal government for filing any taxes, any money that you need to file. Banks used to take the money and you can file your payments through the bank, but now you have to file through EFTPS. I think I put a copy of the how to register for that if you have not done that. Most of the time, the only time you pay taxes is if you file a 990T, which is the unrelated business tax income return, which I did put a copy of the 990s and the 990Ts in there. The 990T has to be filed if you have $1,000 or more in income with unrelated business income. And that could be if you're getting royalties off of a Office Depot or a federal shipping program, or if you're selling insurance through your organization, things like that. That's unrelated business income. So if you have $1,000 or more of that each year, you must file a 990T. With the chamber, we also have a magazine and we sell advertising, and that is unrelated business income as well. But that can be filed with your 990. You do not have to file a separate 990T for that. But if you have other unrelated income, then you will have to file a 990T. Also in your binders, I put together a checklist of things that our auditor, I've been doing this, like I said, for 19 years, so each year it seems like a little bit more gets added to this list. But this is my checklist each year before I have an audit or to process the tax return. This is the information they will need for the tax return. So, and it just makes it easier for them, and throughout the year, if you just make your binder, it's just a tool to use to help you with processing your tax return. And it asks for like your number of board of directors, number of hours of volunteers, your W-2s. It goes into payroll information, things like that, et cetera, et cetera. Then next off, we're going to go into the employment tax returns. And I'm not sure if you do your payroll in-house, if you have a vendor that does all your tax returns and things like that. But just make sure that you keep those on file, of course, and make sure your financial statements reflect what's on those 941s and 940s, and because that's when you go through an audit, they will compare the two returns, the return to your what's on your financial statements. An I-9 form, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. That's the immigration form that is required the first 3 days of employment. This has to be kept at the employer's work site. And so just make sure you are doing that. My recommendation is also to not put that form in your personnel files, because if you they come in and they want to audit your I-9 forms, you don't want to have to pull everybody's personnel files out. You just keep a separate file just for the I-9 forms and for when they do come in and want to look at those. And I've heard that they are going out and auditing that more frequently, so just be aware of that. On the state of Missouri returns, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I had a question on the I-9.
Uh-huh.
Is it, I think I read somewhere where if the employee is working, it has to be in one file, and if it's non-working or past employee, it has to be in a separate file?
Yes.
Is that
Yes,
correct?
because you want to just pull the file of all current employees, and so you pull that. But you keep the I-9 form for 3 years after they've left. So, any other questions? Okay. State of Missouri returns. I'm not going to go into tax returns. Most of these are for since you're new with the chamber world, or you're just new on the board, or a new executive director. This happened to me recently where I do an accounting for another organization that's not for profit, and I went in to try to get some information for this organization through Department of Revenue and through Secretary of State. They wouldn't talk to me because I was not a registered agent. And so then I'm like, well, who is thinking the previous person was the registered agent, and they're like, no, that's not the registered agent either. And it was like 2 years registered agent was the executive director ago. So what I would recommend, if you're new in the organization, make sure you go, and I put the websites, I think, on your sheet here. Like a registered agent is with Department of Revenue. And making sure if something goes on with your tax returns, it would be unemployment tax returns, your 1120 that you have to file for a not-for-profit through the state of Missouri. In order for you to talk to them, make sure you have changed to the registered agent. Another one is sales tax exemption, which I put an application for that in. If you're not sales tax exempt yet, you haven't filed for that, you're not-for-profit, you should be able to get a tax exemption certificate. With that, make sure you are registered with Department of Revenue and with Secretary of State for that, because they both have to communicate for that. And your annual registration is usually due for your not-for-profits on August 15th, which is coming up here. So make sure that's done as well. Some of you are an annual, some are biannual. Depends on what the Secretary of State has set you at. Make sure that is done, because if once you don't file that return, your organization is null and void with the state, and you'll have to redo all your applications. The annual registration with the Secretary of State, it's for not-for-profits, it's due on August 15th, so it's coming up. If you have not filed that return, then your organization is no longer in good standing with the state. So, and you'll have to file all your paperwork again.
Is that just for the tax exempt status?
No, this is for your registration of a not-for-profit organization with Secretary of State.
This is probably a dumb question, but does the state send you something that says that you're due?
Yeah, you'll get a postcard, and it's usually
when your license is up?
yes. Well, it's always August 15th for not-for-profits. So I'd say about July 1st is when I got mine. It's a little postcard, and it says your registration is due, and you might, if you haven't gotten it, you might be on a biannual. You might want to just go on Secretary of State's website and check to see if you're in good standing. So, I mean, and like I said, it's always August 15th, and I register probably 10 different organizations, and this year I had 2 that I can register as annual, and the rest I can register by biannual. It depends on the organization. There's no rhyme or reason why they do that. I don't know. So, but just make sure, I would go to Secretary of State, make sure you're in good standing, and if you're not, then file your return. Okay, finally, audit preparation. I'm assuming most of you go through some type of audit each year or every other year. Some organizations do a review some years and then do a full-blown audit every 3 years. So, I mean, here at the chamber, we do an audit every 2 years, or a review every 2 years and then an audit every third year. Just the review is not as intense. They don't go through every little thing, but during audit, of course, they will do for every account and go through everything. So, but with your process of bidding out, I would recommend at least having 3 accounting firms bid out. Also, another thing with audit bids, you might want to put that as one of your policies in your board manual, that's automatic, so that for fraud issues, you don't want to continue with the same auditor year after year after year. Might put in there that every 5 years you bid out to get a new auditor, and go through the bid process. But once they will usually submit questions to you, what you have to so they can bid, and they want to see your financial statements and things like that so they can bid out your different entities and making sure if you have to have a 990T because you have unrelated business income and things like that. So when you do go through an audit or a review, just make sure what I do is I look at my balance sheet, and my balance sheet I make sure there's a ledger that goes with every one of my accounts, and that is presented to our auditors. It makes it much easier. There's no questions to ask. Make sure, and then also you can audit it yourself to see, okay, this is where I should be, but I'm off like $300. Then you can tell between the two, oh, there's an error here. And then you can correct it before they come in. So I try to do as much auditing as I can before the auditors come in, and then they look at all my journal entries, and they look at all my ledgers that I put together in my spreadsheets, and it's all parallel, so they don't have any questions when they come in. So, and then also that eliminates so many adjusting entries too for them, and you know where you're at the end of the year prior to the audit coming in. The different reports I would do for your accounts receivable and your accounts payable, and also make copies of everything that's receivable and accounts payable, so they have that, so they can determine, yes, that it should be accounts payable, yes, it should be accounts receivable, just to make it easier for them. Checking in investments, make sure if you have investments elsewhere, make sure all those schedules are there, your purchases, what you've made purchases with investments, make sure they have a copy of all that. It's just very important that you keep everything in line so that they don't see, oh, why is this, 100,000, but I only show 90,000. Where's that $10,000 variance? And then you could tell them, okay, because we did this, that's where the 10,000 went. Just keep your records all in order. Notes payable, which, if you have things that are your building or any of your, if you have vehicles or something that you've had a note on, your schedule of payments for that, make sure you have a good schedule with that. And then all your interest and all that has been calculated correctly. Then capital expenditures, which is your depreciation schedules. Normally, you want to make sure that you have all your schedules put together for that. Most accountants will say that if you have something that's going to last more than 3 years, or 2 to 3 years, you need to capitalize it. You don't say a computer costs you $1,200. Well, you don't expense that all in that fiscal year. You capitalize that. So if it's over 3 years, you're only going to expense $400 each year. So that's how you would budget just for $400 as well. It's because that computer's not going to just last you that 1 fiscal year. It's going to last you 3 fiscal years. So you need to capitalize that. Even equipment, any type of equipment, your furniture, your cars, your vehicles that you purchase, that all needs to be depreciated, because that expense is not for 1 year, it's for years down the road. Even if you have a building, our building here is depreciated on 40 years. It hopefully will last more than 40 years, but that's the key, is make sure you're not just expensing everything in that 1 fiscal year.